Welcome to the Daily Flow. Please welcome your host, John Coleman.
So the question that I got today was, what do the developers do in the last week of a sprint? So I think here this is a software development question. So the person's involved in software development, and in software development, they have these kind of steps of how the work gets done. And if you're not in software, you might also have some kind of workflow. The work gets done in a particular sequence. And in software development, the prevailing wisdom before was that you talk to a customer, you find out what she's looking for, you might do some analysis on that, you might do some design, could be architectural design, could be UX research, could be some user interface design, and then maybe some tests would be written. And if people are using driven development, they'd write some tests, even though no code has been created yet to pass those tests. The tests would all fail, and then they'd write code to pass the tests. And then once the code passed the test, they go back and tidy it up. It's like three hats, really. You're writing the test, then you're writing code to pass the test, and then you're refactoring. Test-driven development is known as. Some people don't do test-driven development in software. They've got a kind of a manual approach, a very old-fashioned approach where the developers do the code, write the code, and then maybe the developers do some testing. I hope they do. I hope they're not just throwing stuff over the wall. And then some tester people would check that it's all working properly and that kind of thing. To give Waterfall some credit, the traditional approach to doing this kind of stuff, you just did it once. Okay, you did it twice actually, because you did it once and it didn't work, and then you did it again. You did it twice. But when you have Scrum, for example, you need to deliver an increment every single sprint, and that increment needs to be done. So the team needs to have a thing called a definition of done. And done does not mean met the acceptance criteria. It doesn't just mean that. There should be other considerations as well. And people who aren't trained in Scrum don't even understand what I just said there. So I'll do a whole episode on that. So there's a definition of done. I don't want to really call it the checklist for how we do things around here, because that might be a bit too process oriented, might be a bit too detailed. There's a nice balance between trust and being clear what we need to do. But as such, the team would know what they need to do for something to be called done at the end of the sprint, so they can show something at the end of the sprint. That's all fine. But what do the developers do in the last week of the sprint is what this person was asking me. It feels like a loaded question, because the assumption that I'm reading from the question is that the developers, in your case, write the code and then they hand it off to some people who do some testing. And then those people are busy doing testing and probably raising bugs in the stuff that you created. And so you should be off doing something else. You should run on to the next thing. And it reminds me of a chap that I really respect. His name is Brendan Vochko I think he's from Tennessee, that area of the United States. And he was on the stage there a few years ago at a conference. I think it was Agile Indianapolis. And he gave an example of the kind of behavior that you want to see in a team. And he said, basically, let's say I'm a developer. He pretended he was a developer, right? Like the person who asked this question. And the behavior that Brendan looks for is when the developer is finished their piece of work, and that developer would stick up her hand and say, who's ready to take this away from me? I wouldn't take on a next piece of work. Who's ready to take this away from me? That was really smart what Brendan said there, because it could be tempting for the developer to move on to the next thing. The best time to actually iron out any misunderstandings or any bugs that there might be and so on is you've just worked on it. And so before you context switch onto something else, maybe you need to collaborate with the tester. So making sure that everything's gone okay and that you're working it together, so you don't move on to the next thing. And maybe you have the person that you handed the work off to. You shouldn't be handing work anywhere. You should be collaborating, but you just work together and try to understand that together. And that's what we expect in Scrum. We expect you to collaborate and not run on to your next thing. There are no roles in Scrum. We do have accountabilities, but you don't have like sub roles, if you like. So really what we'd be encouraging is what Brendan would have encouraged when he was on the stage in Indianapolis, which is when you have something and you feel like someone needs to take it away from you within the team, or you want to collaborate with someone in the team to get it to done, you stick up your hand and say, who's ready to take this away from me and who's ready to collaborate with me to try and get this thing to done? That's what I would recommend. That would be my answer to that question. Also, there's lots of other things you could be doing. Product backlog management in Scrum, in a really good Scrum team, would be delegated to the developers. Developer in Scrum means anyone doing the work, regardless of whether you're a tester, analyst, or UX, or whatever you are. And so product backlog refinement in a really good Scrum team would be delegated to the developers, and the developers would be clarifying the problems to be solved with the customers and end users. Maybe you could be looking at what's coming up next. Do we understand that? Do we have a common understanding? You might have one person in the team who has a really good understanding about what that work is, but actually, do they really understand it? When you hear people having an argument, are they arguing about the same thing? Like, first of all, it's part of backlog of time. Are we talking about the same thing? Do we understand what the opportunity is, what the problem is to be solved? So that'd be my little tip. What do developers do in the last week of the sprint? They're part of a Scrum team. They work to get us to the sprint goal. They collaborate. You don't just hand that off to someone else. You pause for someone to collaborate with you to get that work done. And failing that, there's lots of product backlog of time can be done. You could even be writing tests for the next sprint, actually, getting ready. You don't arrive in the next sprint with your hands in your pockets. So maybe that's for refinement as well. Having the test written so that when you have a chat then with the customers and users, say, if we do these, if these tests pass, is that what you're looking for? And if they say yes, then you're in business. That's my suggestion. Thank you so much.